Alright, now back in the bathroom here. You can see I've laid out my other sheet of 14 by 22 river rock here. So you did it with 2 whole sheets here, and then some of the trimmed that I took off the other sheets are up on the top, along with some single pieces that I'm trying to stitch in to make a decent sized 14 by 22 rectangle. That will all go right here inside the soap niche. It's very tedious work doing that, but that's the way you have to do it with this type of stone. So I want to show you, this is an example here of just a tile here that we might use in this position. And you can't just assume that the tile is going to lean up against the wall there. That's not correct, because there's going to be the thickness of the mortar that you put there. So for example, if you look at this tile here, see the thickness of that mortar there? It's about 1/4 of an inch, maybe even a little more. So depending on, if there's dips in the wall, you may even have to go thicker. So my rule of thumb is always that I think the mortar is going to be about the thickness of the tile. So when I trowel a 1/2 inch mortar mix on here onto the wall, it's going to mash down half height to about 1/4 of an inch. That's a good rule of thumb. So that means the tile is actually going to look something like this, coming up against the wall like that. It'll be separated. So in theory, if I can get this little piece here, you would make your tile come out that distance to match it. See how it's actually sticking out past the surface of the wall, because it has to meet the front surface of that tile. So don't screw up your measurements when you're taking measurements. You got to do all of this dry fitting to figure things out. Now in this case, since this is ceramic tile and you either have a white edge or this orange edge, what we're doing is we're using these little pencil pieces here to make a frame in the front of it, so that you don't see it. The frame will cover it up. So the problem is now if you have the pencil going right here, you can't have the tile this long. It's got to cut down a little. So we have this other piece over here. You drop that piece out of the way. We have this tile here, and you can see I brought it just to the edge there, because when we put this pencil piece here in front and then allow for that distance of the mortar, let me try to line this up for you, you're going to end up something like this. And it's hard to do it with one hand, but eventually these will all fit and line up. So that sort of sets the distance that you're going to make that tile cut there. Right, so now we want to go over with you the which order do we put these tiles in here on this niche. And believe it or not, yes, there really is a pecking order of what order do you put them in. So I've seen people do it in several different ways, but I believe that my way here that I'm going to show you, that I've been using for years, is the better way to do it. So some people, I think, make the mistake of thinking, well, you got to put the back piece in first, and then you put this one up in front of it. But see, the problem is now you have an upward facing grout line here, and I think that's a big no-no. The best way to do it is you got to look at the way the water is flowing, and what it's going to do is, I think you should have the bottom piece in first, then the back piece goes on top of it, and there's no grout line. So you just do a thin bead of caulk along the bottom there. And so water is going to hit this back piece first, bounce down and hit this and roll off back into the tub. That's the best way to do it. So now let's ask the question in the pecking order here. Should I do the back first or the sides first as the next step? And well, what if you did the side piece first and it went in like this? And then you can see you'll have a forward facing grout line. That's another scenario that I try to avoid, because water could eventually over time seep in through that grout line and then get behind the tiles. Okay, so what I want to show you here is what I'm going to do with this piece here. So here's my right side piece, and watch this. I'm going to slide it in the back there, and so see how it fits a nice perfect tight corner in there. And again, you just run a bead of silicone up there. So there is no forward facing grout line at all. Any water that comes in and hits this niche is going to bounce either off the walls or off the back and then down to the bottom and gone. So you can see our pecking order so far then is the bottom plate first, the back plate second, and the right and left sides can go next. Now, one other thing to consider is, let's say you want to put, there's going to be a top piece that goes there too, which should match the bottom piece, flipped around. So if you're going to put that top piece, some people like to rest it on top of the left and right tiles here. So I would have to cut this tile down a little further in order to let that upper piece, with the thickness of its mortar, give it all that distance to come down and rest on top of that. That's where the art really comes in on this. Is, you know, you make your cuts on the wet saw on the left and right pieces, and I guarantee you're going to be going back to the wet saw probably 2 or 3 more times to get it narrowed down. But that's really the best way to do it, to make sure that it stays completely tight to where you think the upper piece is going to connect. Alright, so this is where the sheet of river rock is going to look like this, and this will be the back piece. Now, of course, they'll have lots of grout on here. This will all get sealed. The grout will be sealed as it's mixed. So you shouldn't have too much of a problem with it. Now, as we keep working the area around the niche here, I went ahead and decided, well, we want to put the accent banner border right along here. Figured this would be a great spot to do it, right below the windowsill. It's a great breaking point, and it'll still come up sufficiently high enough on the arch niche, although normally we prefer to do it about 50%, about halfway, to make it look symmetrical. But you can't always do that. So this is pretty close. You're at about 1/3. And so you can see we had to cut this piece here to accommodate. And so we're just going to have the banner come around here. It'll stop there. It'll pick up on the other side of the niche here, and it'll go right to here, and it'll stop right here at the corner piece. So we'll take a step back here a minute and just look here at all of these dry fitted pieces here up top. What I like to do whenever you have the length of a tile, about 22 inches or so. Whenever I break that length up like this and put a little banner in there, I always like the next piece on top, the aggregate of all 3 of these pieces here, to equal the length of one whole tile, like this one down here. So I'd like to take that length, bring it up here, and make it equal to those. So we'll be cutting a shorter piece to go on top here, and that will bring everything back in line with what we've done over here, because these were full pieces here. So everything will come back in line, and it'll match this line that you see right here. And then we'll be starting again with a new row of tiles going up there. Well, here we are. We've now gone ahead and completed all the field tiles going up the wall here that has the niche on it. And you can see we've employed a bunch of different methods here. There's certainly a madness to my method, but yeah, sometimes you have to improvise and use different things here. So we use these big chunks of styrofoam here to hold up the tiles here so they wouldn't sag down. It would be your worst nightmare to put tiles up on the wall and then come in the next morning and find out that they dropped from the position that you had them in. And we also had to use this board here to keep it pressure on this tile to keep him up in the exact position we needed it to be in, up against the wall there. Sometimes the tiles have a little bit of a cuppage to them, and they want to pop away from the wall. They won't stay all the way in where you put them. So this helps out with that too. Well, now it's time to go ahead and start tiling the niche here. And you remember before when we were planning everything and doing some test dry fitting and stuff, I showed you how you have to be aware of the space here that's going to be present when you put the tile here. You're going to have that little bit of thickness of the mortar, which is about the thickness of the tile, so in this case about 1/4 inch. And so if we cut the back piece like this here, we had to leave room to be able to put our little frame piece that we're going to use here. Now keep in mind the frame piece is going to be elevated up slightly, so we'll have a little grout line like that, see? And you always want to make it so that this guy is either higher or at the same height as the pencil piece, otherwise the water won't drain off, right? You don't want the pencil piece being above it like that. So that's why everything is real critical, that all that planning and everything. And so everything's going to fit kind of like this. And we will have a grout line right here. Usually I try to avoid a horizontal grout line on the bottom of the niche if I can. In this case it was unavoidable because I could have just cut a whole piece of tile to come all the way to the front. The problem is this is ceramic, and so it's a brown tile there in the front. So you got to do something to cover it up, and that's what this frame all the way around the edge is going to do. It's going to cover it for us. Let me set this aside for a second, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do underneath. So in order to get this thing to be at that elevation, I used some stones here that you see left over from my little fancy border piece here. So you're going to elevate it about 1/4 of an inch in the front, but then I got to have a slant to it. It's got to give it an incline. So we're going to use the same 1/4 inch tall in the back, and you can see I stuck the little blue shim on there, that little wedge, and that'll elevate it 1/8 of an inch so that when you put the tile in place here, you can see it is sitting at an incline there. So any water that lands on this will drain out. That's only at a slight incline. So we're going to cement all of this down now, and then we're going to cement the back pieces on and then the side pieces, or we might do the top before the side. We'll see how it works out. Alright, so now we're getting ready to mount these tiles onto the back of the niche there. Problem is when you're dealing with sheet mosaic tiles like this, I mean, they're very unruly. They flop all over the place. They're very difficult to work with. So what I will do sometimes is I'll take some blue tape and just start taping it across the front of the tiles like this. And you can see where I've got a completed one right here. And it does make it a little bit more stiff, not the best in the world, but usually maybe enough to get it on the wall and work with it. However, sometimes you may find some tiles that are still loose, and it could pinch the tape, and then it's almost like it didn't do its job. So sometimes what I'll also do, I've done this in the past, is I'll use a sheet of this Curdy waterproofing membrane here. And so I'll cut a sheet to match like the back of this 12 by 12. And what you do is you lay it down on a tabletop like this, and you trowel out some Thinset mortar right onto it. And you do just to thin them out because you don't want it oozing all the way up here through all of these cracks. And you just mount the tiles right onto this and let it sit there overnight and dry. And when it dries in the morning, it'll be nice and rock hard and stiff. And then you just cement that whole thing right onto your wall. So I may end up doing that right here where we're going to go all the way up the shower there with the river rocks. We may end up doing that for the smaller 7-inch wide section. Alright, so for troweling out the back of the niche here, I'm going to go with a smaller 3/16 inch trowel because I think that's all these stones really need, because you don't want this bleeding through. And I've also switched here to a polymer modified Thinset, as the manufacturer of the plastic niche here requires. So I could have also used the Schluter all set that I've been using for the field tiles, but I decided to, since I had a half a bag of this lying around, I'll use this. And in case you're wondering, yes, I do indeed back butter even the back of the mesh here, because I want to make sure every one of my tiles here is going to be adhered to the Thinset. And now I can start peeling off the tape and making sure everything's fine with all my little river rocks here. So you'll see some areas where a little bit of Thinset came through, and we'll just have to poke those out. I like doing that with Q-tips. And so here we are back again a few minutes later. it looks like it'll fit. Just kind of mash it down there into the mortar. Good, we'll get one to fit in here, another one for there, another one down there, and a couple more down here. We'll cut up some real skinny slivers to fit in there, and you'll never even know it. Well, I can see it's coming along nicely. We put the right wall in here, and now we're getting ready to cement in the left wall. Leave about 1/4 of an inch space in front, thickness there, so that we can get our frame piece to fit in there. It's going to be going like this, see? So that's all we got to do. So all of the field tiles of the soapinish are now installed. You can see them all on here. Bottom, left side, right side, and the top. Now I'm going to install my frame made out of the, these are the pencil pieces. These are travertine pencil tiles. So I've already cut them and fitted them together so there won't be any surprises, and all I'm going to do is transfer them from here and fit them right up into here. So let me show you this here. They're going to go right here. And I'll have to do a lot of finagling with spacers and stuff to get everything, all the grout lines even. So we'll get started on that. Well, there you have it. All of the travertine pencil tile pieces are now framed around the outside of the niche here. So you can see the real tricky part was getting all of the grout lines to even out. So that's where we used all of these blue wedges here. But in the end, it was worth it. You're looking at about 5 hours worth of work right there, just on this niche alone, from the time we started tiling it. All right, so now that we're done with the installation of all the tiles, this is natural stone here, these rocks, and so are these pencil pieces here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put on a sealer and enhancer. Now there's two types of this sealer that you can get. There's one like this one that has the enhancer built into it, and then there's another type that doesn't have an enhancement. So this sealer will kind of add like a little bit of contrast to it. And if you don't want that type of effect to it, then you can just get the regular sealer and it will leave it looking exactly like this. It'll kind of blend. I like to give it a little punch, a little kick to it. So I've already got some here in a cup here. And all I do is very simple. Use my paintbrush here. I just brush it across. Try to let it get in the middle there too, on the sides, the edges of the stone. What this sealer does, because this is natural stone, it's very porous. And when you go to grout, if you were to just grout right on these, you could possibly stain these, and this might even absorb the grout, and you wouldn't be able to get all of it like off the front. And sometimes it seeps into the edges, and it discolors your natural stone. So this just keeps it looking like natural stone without it being absorbing. And you can see right now it's getting a little bit contrasty. So you can see how these here on the right hand side have a little bit more saturation to the color, a little more contrast to it. So that's what that effect does. And then down here on the pencil, I don't want to get any on the other tiles because those are ceramic. They don't need to get sealed. But you just kind of drag it gently across. And you can see almost right away how the effect of the enhancing part. See how these grain patterns here are really starting to become prominent. And that's all you do. And you got to wait 2 to 3 days before you can grout. That's working with stone takes a long time because it adds a lot of days to your calendar for all of the extra steps and stuff that you have to do. But you do have to do it. If you try to take a shortcut, you're going to end up with a failed installation. I just wanted to share with you this little trick here. Whenever you get like little bits of globs of thinset mortar that poke through the mesh and come too far forward, I usually like to use a nail set because it's got a nice sharp pointed edge, And I just get in there and kind of clean it out, kind of like a dentist cleaning out the cavities there. So this is very useful for getting some of those little chunks out. And then when you're done, before you seal up the rocks, you get a vacuum cleaner and suck out all of this dust. And come by with a, right here I'm going to get a wet rag and bring it over here and get this little bit of cement off the front. So that's all you got to do, just scrub down your rocks really good. Alright, so we're going to be using this Navajo brown colored grout. And I never mix water, use water to mix the grout. I always use like a grout additive and a sealer. So this one here is made by the manufacturer to go with the grout. And I've already dumped 32 ounces of it in here. We're only going to mix half a batch. So this is a 25-pound bag. I'm only going to put in 12.5 pounds of product. So here you can see I've switched to the glove to get at some of these tighter spots here. I think it's just a little bit more efficient use of the time. Plus I can get into some of the nooks and crannies, like I got to get up in there with it. Okay. See, so here I can get a good feel for what's going on here with the stones. And I get all of these areas filled in because I can feel it better with my hand. Alright, so it's been about almost 15 minutes on this part up here. So I'm going to take my sponge right here. And I always use a nice tall bucket of clean water. And when it starts to get cloudy, you want to make sure you change that to fresh, clear water, because you don't want to keep putting muddy water back onto the wall. That would defeat your purpose of cleaning it off. You got your sponge here, right? And what I always do is one stroke only, then flip it over, one stroke. Flip it on this edge, flip it on this edge here, and then that edge and that edge. So there's 6 edges to this sponge. So you only get 6 wipes, and then you have to go back and redunk it. Do not wipe it and then come back on to another part of the tile with the same side that you just wiped, because all you're going to be doing is smearing mud around. So this is what I do. I come right down the line there, and I flip it over. I come right down here and flip it over. And I come right down the edge, like that, flip it over to the other edge, come right down this edge, and so forth. So you can see this is already kind of drying and getting a little hard, so I'm going to probably do 2 applications of this. And then a couple of hours later, I may come by with a damp cloth and just clean off the main part of the tile and leave the grout alone. I won't touch the grout. And then when the grout dries overnight, it should be just a very thin powdery haze that should wipe off with a dry cloth. Well, we've completed the initial grouting and wiping phase. It's been about 4 or 5 hours so far. And you can see there's a little bit of haze on the rocks there. And we have, you can see some little bit excess haze right here in some of these areas. So what I'm going to do is I have a fresh new bucket of water here with a sponge. And I'm just going to hit the areas of the tile away from the grout lines. We'll probably get a little bit of water dribbling on it, but it's not really going to do anything. I'm not brushing up against it and dragging, more grout off, or making more mud or anything out of it. I'm just only going to clean the surface of the tile. So for example, you can see here, I'm going to do just this one right here, and just going to do a wipe right there, all the way down to, and then stop before the grout line. And you can see not a whole lot comes off, which is good, because at this point there shouldn't be a lot of haze on there. And if I go to the other side of the sponge now and do it again, see, virtually nothing. So each successive time you wipe now, you should have less and less haze on there that would cause any problem for you. And then when you squeeze it into the water, you'll see your water will stay clearer longer. So we're going to continue this all around. Well, you can see how much of a difference it made by sponging it off. If you see, the right side here looks nice and clean, whereas the left side and the rocks here still have the haze on it. So now that we're pretty much done with the larger tiles, we're now going to do just a quick light sponge down here on the rocks because we need to bring the color back on. There's just way too much haze on haze that I don't think it'll come off very easily in the morning. So you can see I just have the sponge is just barely damp, and just trying to scrape off some of the haze there without disturbing the grout. And you can see it's not really affecting the sponge too much there. But I'll go to the other side here. See up near the top, just to try to get the haze off of the rocks. And then here in the niche, you can see there's a little bit of haze right along the bottom piece here. So I just want to give that a good wipe, get that cleaned off. And then I'll go ahead and just give these a quick wipe to bring back the color. So now when we come in the morning, the haze will be truly a nice, clean, thin, powdery layer that all we got to do is just wipe it off with a dry cloth.